Well, thank everybody for coming today to my talk. My talk is a talk that actually came about after I wrote an article for Smashing Magazine of the same title, and people said you need to turn that into a talk, so here we are. So thank you, sponsors. Thank you, Code on the Beach, organizers and everything. And thank all of you for coming today. I appreciate it. So a little bit about me. I come from the great state of Maine, where we love our lobster. I'm going to be talking about lobster, and I have a few slides that have lobsters in them. So I live now in Arizona now, and yeah, it was 115 last week, and I got here and I said, the humidity ain't that bad. And yeah, that was the last lobster roll I had while in Maine. That picture's gonna come up again, so be warned. We love our lobster rolls and we love our lobster. Maine's known for lobster. So pardon all the lobster slides. So again, Phoenix, Arizona by way of Portland, Maine. I am the accessibility team lead at Webstaurant Store. I am an accessibility engineer at the Center for Inclusive Design in Sydney, Australia, where I do a little bit of work for them. And people are like, so why 2 jobs? I love what I do. I've been doing it for a long time now, and I like making things accessible for disabled people, which in turn benefits everybody else. I'm a W3C invited expert in accessibility, and I'm working with a lot of talented folks on WCAG 3, which will be coming in about 3 to 5 years. And it'll be a lot different than the guidelines we have now. And with the lobbying a few of us did, hopefully it's not going to be the technical manual you see now if you go on the W3C site. It'll be more plain language, easier to understand for people just starting out or wanting to learn accessibility. We're working very hard to make it accessible for people. 23 plus minus years, developer design and accessibility experience, and it's been a battle. So when I started, I didn't have a lot of data to go through and present to people, to present to organizations, to present to CEOs and stakeholders. Now we have a lot of data, and the data I use is from the WebAIM Million report, which has a lot of good stuff in it. So what the WebAIM Million report is, it tests 1 million homepages, the most popular in that testing. And in those million homepages, over 50.8 million accessibility errors on just the homepages alone. That's a lot. It's decreased a little bit, but that 1.1%, I'd like to see that a lot higher. I think anybody in accessibility would like to see that higher. How many of you, with a show of hands, work at an organization that practices accessibility? Okay, 1, 2, 3, okay. Hopefully I'll see more next talk. How many of you work in an organization that is learning to implement accessibility in your organization? 1, 2, 3, okay, yeah. All right. Well, that's why I'm here. So homepage elements increased a lot. So 887, 955 elements per homepage. It's a lot. That's a very busy homepage. That's up 7.7% since last year. That's a huge increase. And 5.3% of all those homepage errors had a detected accessibility error. It's improvement over the last few years, but as an accessibility person, we're always looking to do better. And so I can live with these numbers for now. 96.8% had WCAG 2 failures, whether that's WCAG 2.0, 2.1, those two factor in. 2.2 is coming soon. I give it 6 months to a year that it should be here. So the first thing on the list was low contrast text. So the people that have low vision, and those of you who wear eyeglasses that are assistive technology, that affects you. I can read that, but as I go and advance in age, or as I like to say, level up, that's going to be a lot tougher for me to read. Why is that an issue? Well, that pink rectangle there with the 4.16, that falls beneath the guideline for minimum contrast of text in the guidelines. There's your guideline. A 4.5 to 1 ratio is what we're looking for, or what the guidelines are looking for. What I like to look for is 7 to 1, which is a AAA level. But even then, and I'll explain it a little later, 10 to 1 should be where you're at as far as minimum contrast. And I'll, again, explain that later. Missing alternative text in images, that's a huge one. How many of you have a Twitter account? A few of you, yeah. How many of you have seen images with no alt text on Twitter? Huh?
The majority of them.
Yeah, oh yeah. Yep. So here's that image again. Todd loves to roll with hot butter and blueberry soda. That first line of code, that's no good. That alt text is there for screen readers and assistive technologies. That alt text will read that to the user to tell them what the content of that photo is. If it's a decorative image, it will use the second line of code, which is null or empty alt text. This one is what we want when we're showing an informative image. Todd's loves to roll hot butter and blueberry soda. The top 6 issues in the report. Those are those are low-hanging fruit. Those are the type of issues that shouldn't be missed, but they are. People have asked me, well, what's the one thing out of these 6 that you think is the big one? And I think it's that missing document language. Because that first line of code and that language attribute is going to tell the screen reader, read that web page in that language, whether it's EN, EN-GB, EN-AU for Australia. There are tons of other codes for different countries to read it in their language. So I think that big one, because that's where you're starting off. That's where your document is starting off. Those 6 resulted in this. That's a lot. That's low-hanging fruit right there. And I'll get into the whys of that, the whys that I have seen in a few. So again, color contrast, greater than 10 to 1. Why greater than 10 to 1? With the current scoring system, basically what you have is it takes the foreground color, which is the text, and measures that on the background color. There's your ratio with the math that it does. It's pretty simplified math. With the new scoring system that's coming in WCAG 3, and I don't know how many of you have seen APCA floating around on the internet. One, okay. So that's an experimental scoring system. Don't use it in production because it's not ready for prime time. And then the rest of these. A real important one, make sure keyboard accessible and screen reader accessible. Those are the big two that are really, I find a lot of that. I do a lot of auditing for our internal sites, our partner sites for the company I work for. There's a ton of them that we have that are not keyboard accessible. Scrollable interactive content. You need to be able to tab through and tab into that content. And being a keyboard user, like I am sometimes, not everybody that uses a keyboard is a blind user either. But I want to be able to scroll into that content, or I want to be able to tab into that content. And I want to be able to operate, and if there's a scroll bar, I want to be able to go down with the arrow key. That needs to be accessible. Iframes, those cause a little problems too. Those need to be accessible. Then you have alternative text again, especially with infographics, charts, and graphs, because with all the information you have on those, that needs to be conveyed in either a caption or a link to a separate page which explains what's on that graph or chart or infographic. I was out for lunch today and I couldn't see on my phone. That's another issue. And that also falls under contrast as well. So with the situational disabilities here, how many of you have worked with a child on your lap or a broken arm or an injury of some sort that has diminished? Okay, yeah. I had somebody who asked me, well, why do we need things to be accessible? And I said, well, take off your glasses and read to me what we have on our website. And he couldn't. So he put the glasses on. I said, those are assistive technology. You need those glasses to be able to read and see. Light bulb moment, I've worked with, carpal tunnel. So situational disabilities are also a thing. I had somebody ask me, disability is just blind, deaf, and paralysis, right? Nope. Nope. Here's a list I put together: motor skill, cognitive, and then you have the one I suffer from. Migraine headaches, and my eyes are sensitive to really bright light, so I love the lighting in here. Photophobia. I recently had it out on Twitter, why I don't know. Somebody posted a video of Rage Against the Machine in concert. I love Rage Against the Machine, right? I wanted to see what it was all about. I started the video, flashing right away. I get it, it's a concert. I had to shut it off. I felt the effects of that 4 days later. I had a migraine for 2 days, and then I had to recover because the meds I take, sumatriptan, those make me feel really tired and suck the energy right out of me. So I'm feeling that 4 days later. Guy says to me, because I asked the person who tweeted the video, I said, could you please put a content warning on that tweet saying there's flashing light? That can induce seizures. That can cause migraine, headaches. So reply guy says, so don't watch the video. That tells me right there, you don't care. That speaks volumes. And that's where I just say, okay, conversation's over. I tried to be a little bit diplomatic, explain how it affects people. Don't care. Stop acting like a girl. Oh, that's perfect, you know. Anyway, so yeah, a lot of other things that are involved with disability, and a lot of the people that I know that are disabled, I was always afraid of using the word disability. They say, use it. That's what it is. So use the word disability. Some of the not so greatest hits, the excuses I've heard, and there have been a ton of them. The client doesn't have the budget for it. I learned early on, accessibility is not a feature. Accessibility is not in a checklist. Put it right into the contract. So when I was doing freelance for 17 years, I was putting accessibility right into the contract. This project will be accessible. We'll get to it after launch, which is probably the worst time to practice accessibility. Does anybody know why? You're going back, you're making your engineers work twice as hard. You're using up more money to pay them to do that. They're getting stressed out because they have to go back and they have to fix things. And it's a vicious cycle, and we see it all the time. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to a developer, an engineer, or even a designer that has said, we're going back and we're doing it again because it wasn't accessible. I've heard it seems like a million times. Accessibility starts at the inception of the project, not halfway through, not a quarter of the way through, not at the end. Oh, hell no, not at the end. I have a list. I have a long list. It's not that long on these slides though. Why do we even need to make this thing accessible? Because not everybody's a white dude who has, 20/20 vision, has all their range of mobility, has all their faculties about them. There's no time to do this. Oh, yes, there is. There's plenty of time to make stuff accessible. That one right there. Yeah, okay. Right? That one right there, I almost fell over in my chair. I worked for a company, and the president of the company said, we don't have disabled users. And I said, excuse me? And then he went on to say, the people that use our product are not disabled. And I went, blah, blah, blah. What? How do you know that? Oh, I know our users. You do. So, so-and-so at this company that's using our SaaS product, which is totally inaccessible, broke her arm the other day. And now she's got to use the keyboard to go through and input all the numbers into the product. That's a situational disability. Oh, Those glasses you have on, those are assistive technology. I don't know how many times I've used the eyeglasses because, you know, they're an assistive technology. This one, this one was fun. This was the CEO, and I immediately said, have fun with that lawsuit. I think we're nearing 5,000, if not over 5,000 lawsuits this year, and we're not even through the entire year. Accessibility lawsuits. It's a huge waste of time. Okay. So that tells me you don't care about the ADA, that you don't care about disabled people, that you don't care about equal access to the web, that this company has no empathy, and that maybe I'm not the guy you need. Have fun with that lawsuit. This is what it induced. I don't know if I blinked like that, but yeah, there was a lot of internal screaming, which then turned into me as Ricky standing up in front of a judge going, look, I can't speak without swearing. And in my head, I'm going a million miles an hour. This guy is a... So, how do we work this out? How do we get all our lobsters in a row? Buy-in. I go from the top. I go to that CEO. I go to that stakeholder. And I say, here's what we need to do. And if they come to me and say, how do we make a lawsuit go away? That's usually what I have happen today, these days, when I'm doing outside work, consulting. That support trickles down from the top to the bottom and everywhere in between. Managers, teams, individuals. I've been very fortunate that I've had really good success with companies and organizations jumping on board, and not just because they're avoiding a lawsuit. And when you do it from the start, it helps, it benefits your people. Your engineers benefit from it, your designers benefit from it, your design team, your design systems team benefits from it, your internal tools team benefits from it. Because you have accessible designs, you have clean code, accessible code. I'm not trying to go through, and I didn't make a slide for this, but if anybody's seen that meme with the book that's like this thick, stands up like that, I said, that's one div and Tailwind one day on Twitter, and boy, didn't they come hunting for me, which was fun, because it's true. I don't want to go through code and have a block of code like this, and it's 95% Tailwind. How many Tailwind fans do we have out here? Okay, sorry. It's not my cup of tea. It serves its purpose. I'm not a complete jerk about it. My Domino's pizza card. Well, Target paid for it, Bank of America paid for it, Domino's Pizza paid for it. What was it? 36 grand Domino's could have spent on fixing their accessibility issues, and they ended up, what was it? It was millions. They poured millions into those appeals. I mean, it's pretty simple. Don't do what they did. This one, if you're having a hard time like I have with a few stakeholders and CEOs, this works great. And not just because it's a video of a disabled person trying to access an inaccessible web feature, web app, component, whatnot, it's because you finally hit that empathy with that stakeholder CEO. And they finally get it. Again, that light bulb moment. So I found this, I was researching $8 trillion worldwide disposable income for disabled people. If everything else on this list did not work, usually money works. So I don't know of any CEO or any, high-level person in any organization that would say, I don't want a piece of that pie. Let's get some of that. 490 billion in the US alone. 25.4 billion alone. E-commerce with people with low vision. That's a lot. That's a big part of the pie you're missing out on. You sure you don't want to reconsider accessibility? Oh no, let's do it. Advocates. Having an advocate at your organization, whether it is one in every team, which I highly recommend, or just one person in the organization, works wonders. Having that person focus on accessibility as a liaison between teams, things start to get better, things start to improve. Again, your engineers are less stressed out. Your designers are less stressed out. Those people or that someone can work with other people in the departments, like I have been at the place where I work now, to answer questions, to provide a little bit of training, to show people where there is training. There is training that's out there. You gotta look a little bit for it, but it is out there, and you can go over the guidelines and you can, make accessible products. Those people can set up documentation and tooling. They can serve, again, as that liaison between departments. Assessing the organization. That's a big part of what I used to do. Gauging where the products are. Like when I hit my new job, after I left the previous job, before I started, I looked at all their websites. And that's why I have gray hair. No, just a little bit. That gauges how inclusive and accessible these products are. It's a key priority as far as when I talk about this. You want to know what you're walking into. You don't want to walk in blindly and then be surprised. Oh my God, this stuff is inaccessible. Which goes along with this. What's the current state of everything? The level of knowledge that teams and people have in the company is very important. More often than not, I find that, I've heard of WCAG, I've heard of the W3C, I don't know what it's all about. So I'll explain it. Because sometimes they go right to the W3C site, read the WCAG guidelines that are the worst technical manual known to man, woman, and child, and then they'll come back to me and I don't get it. And I go, let me explain it to you. Even the understanding docs in the current specs are a little bit difficult to understand. Again, we're working on that in WCAG 3. So hopefully, I'm really keeping my fingers crossed that it's going to use plain language, be very easy for people to say, okay, I can pick this up and I can learn and I can run with this. Which leads into this. And it's, accessibility just isn't the WCAG guidelines. There's user experience, there's internationalization, localization. There's usability. There's a lot of different things. There's performance. Performance of a site or an app. Not everybody has a new iPhone, doesn't live in the city, doesn't have 5G or whatever the new one is, ultra wide or whatever. How much training do you have and how much training will you need? Invest in those people. We've invested a lot of time on my team to train designers, engineers, design systems people, internal tools people, to where they kind of coming around. I still kind of see when I do a peer review of a component, I still see that diff. So that's still a popular thing. Training. So all the training you do should meet the requirements of the organization. So the organization should set up requirements on how are we going to address accessibility? How much do we want our people to know? Which should be everything, but you're not going to know everything. I mean, I don't. I reference the docs all the time. I go to people that I know and I say, hey, there's this issue. Would you fail this of this certain, success criteria? And then we hash it out. And it's a great way to keep data on training that's done in the organization. Record it. When it was completed, who did it. I even go back, I'm taking the Trusted Tester course, which is section 508, just to brush up on my skills. Marcy Sutton has a great course that I've just started. I think it's testingaccessibility.com. And she's a powerhouse in accessibility. And content in that has been solid, and I highly suggest it. If there's no inter-organizational training, use organizations that do training. Now, I'll come to one organization in a bit, but you have those three: DQ, TPGI, and WebAIM. There are a couple others, Level Access, and there's another one that's escaping me right now. And the guidelines. Like I said, there's more to the guidelines, or there's more to accessibility than the guidelines, but having a good grasp of the guidelines helps a lot. So if you have an accessible design system, that ensures, along with accessibility, inclusivity and understanding a code better. You have that component. It clearly shows a button. Using a button element, and your engineers are going to know this. They're going to be able to use that. Not an anchor tag, not a div, not a span, please. Span you can kind of get away with, but, and please, I beg of you, do not use a button element and put roll button on it. That's like talking to yourself. Accessible components, reduce time to implement. And testing procedures, JustX is one of the better ones. Pally I've used, and I'm kind of not partial to it because it's not very flexible. And then there's also Axe Core that you can implement in testing as well. This helps your engineers do their job, and once they learn the testing with one of those three, or maybe something else, I don't know if there's anything else out there. I haven't seen anything else. They're making accessible components. They're making accessible things. I use Notion to document the guidelines so that when people have a question, they don't have to come to me right away. They can go right to the document that's online, and they can refer to that document. And if they really need to ask me about that, they will come to me. I'm more than happy to help them. But instead of answering 5 times a day, color contrast 4.5 to 1. It's right there in the document. Standards. If you have a good idea that not only are there different standards in different regions, but you have a basic idea of what they are, that helps. Especially if you're a website, an airline website, let's say. You're under that Section 508 umbrella. There's the American Disabilities Act. Now, I'm going to talk about this towards the end, but your website cannot be 100% ADA compliant because the ADA does not cover the entire thing. Canada has this. The European Union has that. And of course, internationally, WCAG is used. I think it's either 120 or 160 countries or something. I don't even know if there's 160 countries. But it's used widely. And then you have this from the UN, which basically says the internet is a basic human right. Article 9 and 21 of the CPRD. So let's go back to testing and those tools that I mentioned, and different types of testing. You test with disabled users. They have that lived experience. I've done a lot of testing with disabled users, and it has expanded my education by light years. Watching somebody use a Braille machine, watching somebody use a sip and puff machine, watching somebody navigate a site with a pen that's attached to them. And they're navigating that site like I do with a mouse. It's incredible. And I've learned a lot from those testing cases. You present these again to the colleagues and the stakeholders. This company right here, Fable. And I have the link to them in the resources of these slides. They employ disabled people, and they test with those, and those people test your product, your website, and whatnot. Highly suggest them as the first go-to. And hire disabled people. And I say this because not only the teaching and the advocating, but they, again, have those lived experiences. I'm having a battle with my manager trying to hire disabled people. I keep telling them we have 2 people that, little let's do a little sidebar here. I don't consider myself disabled, even with the migraines and the photophobia. I just don't. It's how I feel about it. So I tell my manager, you have 2 people that are not disabled, that are currently on the accessibility team, and we're doing screen reader testing. And there's, I'm sure, something we're missing along the way that we're not catching. And that's always in the back of my mind. Hiring a disabled person, and I've tried to get at least 4 or 5 on our team, they can teach you and they can advocate for hiring more people that are disabled. How many of you have heard of an accessibility overlay? 2, okay. How many of you have seen an accessibility overlay in action? 2, 3, 4.
Where's an overlay?
I'll get to that in a minute.
Is it those things you click and it can change the color of the website, and it can make text bigger?
Yes.
Okay, like a bubble.
Yes. In a way, yes. I've heard this one recently. We use an accessibility overlay, we're okay. The majority of the lawsuits this year, because of that. It's all snake oil. How many of you remember, I'll just say a while back, when SEO was the snake oil? Oh, you got to put all these keywords in the head of the document in your HTML file to make your site rank way high on Google or whatever. This is the new snake oil. This is a marketing effort. A get-rich-quick scheme. These companies, and more, the list is long. There is a link to a site, overlayfactsheet.com, that has more companies that offer an accessibility overlay. You're going to wind up getting sued. I'm working with a small company right now who's getting lawsuit threats every week because they use an overlay. Used, they have disabled it. But what the company does, the overlay company, we can make your website 100% ADA compliant and WCAG compliant. That's the biggest load of bull I've heard in quite a long time. That's an overlay. That was actually one line of code. So, 3rd line down with the web address there, that's when you know you're dealing with accessibility. And the app.js file that makes the overlay tick. So say this is a web page. You know the little icon of the universal icon there for accessibility with the person there? You click it, the thing pops up. You can do all sorts of stuff. It's supposed to make everything better. It doesn't. There's proven testing by a couple of people in the accessibility space, Kyle Groves and Adrian Rosselli. Carl has been silenced by one of these companies, Accessibility, because he's telling people the truth. These don't work. These put up more barriers than they do take them down. I do not, when I put on my Nikes, I'm not Michael Jordan. That code does not make your website accessible. Nikes do not make me dunk basketballs. So what do? We do the work. It's tiring. It's fun at times, but then other times, I have my head in my, hands. But I love the work I do. I love I love giving talks like this at conferences. So a few things that I suggest to organizations: automated testing on new releases, changes that are major changes, make sure they're accessible. Screen reader testing, screen reader analysis when those major changes are made. That's a big one. And you can even throw in keyboard testing too with that, and make sure those changes aren't breaking any accessibility with a keyboard. Annual audits. I've done, suggested some places do an audit every 6 months. Some have even done quarterly audits. There's nothing wrong with that. That's being on top of the game, really. A lot of user testing. A lot. And one key point I like to make is accessibility is never done. And like the web, accessibility is evolving. Unfortunately, it evolved into overlays. However that happened, venture capitalist money.
Can I ask, what sort of tools do you recommend for automated testing?
I recommend the Wave extension. That's by WebAIM. So here's the 4 automated testing tools I use, because they're not going to catch everything. Is the Wave extension, and I use Firefox primarily.
Is that extension one of those ones that run through the browser so it looks like colorblind values, or?
That does it scans for the low-hanging fruit. It does do color contrast checking, and it's one of the more reliable ones. I use the ARC toolkit by TPGI, and that's Chrome only. I use the Axe Dev Tools, and I use the IBM Equal Access Checker. Those are 4 great tools that I use. It's just, each one is a layer of making sure that I try to catch as much as I can. Then I move on to the manual testing. Don't be afraid of doing the work. It's rewarding in the end, I think. So Jeffrey Zeldman wrote in 2019 on Blue Beanie Day. Anybody familiar with Blue Beanie Day? 1. Blue Beanie Day is a day where you put on your blue beanie and you acknowledge web standards, accessibility, inclusion, user experience, all the good stuff that makes the web good, instead of those crappy parts where you can't access it. And I like the first part of this because our industry does think less and less about accessibility. I've talked to a lot of developers, a lot of engineers, a lot of designers. Well, I never knew we had to make things accessible. And the part at the end, over-engineering, that I've seen a lot of that too, and I'm sure, Mr. DeMars, I'm sure you've seen that a lot. Over-engineering results in this, and I'm going to give you a minute to read this. So with this, I have family members with disabilities, one with cerebral palsy, 2 with low vision issues. I know, and I'm sure everybody in here possibly knows somebody with a disability, friends of family. And every time you try to access something that's inaccessible, that does tell you you're not welcome in this world. And when I read this, I was like, that's it right there. That sums it up. I've seen that look of frustration when somebody's tried or trying to access something on the web or in an app that is totally inaccessible. The look of they're ready to give up. That look of, disgust. That look of, whatever. And, when I first saw my cousin who has cerebral palsy, not able to access something, and that feeling like he's not welcome in this world. That right there really amped up my effort in the field of accessibility. That lit a fire under me. Kind of sounds like a movie cliche, but I kind of took it personal. It's family, I tweeted this out a while back because I've been seeing more and more lately. Companies love to throw inclusive and accessible around on their tweets, in their, social media efforts. Oh, it's ADA week, we're accessible, we're inclusive. But then they forget to add alt text to the image on the tweet. That happened recently. I said, but you forgot to put alt text on your tweet. Be careful if you're an organization throwing that around. Because, Chris, a lot of people in the accessibility space that are going to go right after those people. You are one of them. Yeah. I've tried to temper it down in my old age. So I got a shirt here. Accessibility is a right, not a privilege. That was because of that guy back there in the back row. 2019, I heard him talk in Burlington, Vermont, of all places. And you said, which your line was,
accessibility is not just a requirement, it's a must.
no, which spawned this. Because I sat there and I, dealt with people that look like me. And it seemed like it was a privilege. Well, Sir Tim Berners-Lee did not create the internet for a select group of people. He created the internet for everybody. Well, originally it was just to transfer files back and forth. But we all know, it's not just for people that look like me. Proceeds go to nonprofit accessibility companies or accessibility charities. So what's important to me in these talks that I give is that whether your organization does or does not practice accessibility, that maybe it's about time they should, because accessibility, making things accessible, is not for me. It's for disabled people. It benefits everybody else. But in the long run, it's for disabled people, and it's to make the web equal for disabled people. So we're not leaving anybody behind, so nobody feels like they're not welcome in this world. Because everybody is welcome in this world that we are all in, and that's tech, that's the web. So, it's a couple links. The first one's a biggie, I know. The link that I have from my site will go to my slides. You can follow me, reach me on Twitter at Todd Libby. Any questions, feel free. I'd be happy to answer those questions. If I can't answer them, I will find somebody who knows the answer. And with that, thank you.